There was a clear explication that what education is about is being able to go into the world and serve and make it better for people for whom the world is not so good. And I think that was really, I did not know that that wasn't all colleges, that it wasn't about me getting something, but it was about me being able to become something of use and of an agent of change to help people's lives improve. So I'm really grateful for that.
Caroline Proctor. That's my guest for today, and you're about to hear our conversation from earlier this year. Because when I was starting the podcast, I talked to my friend Bill Buchanan, and I was telling him how I was starting a podcast on health and healing and maybe alternative aspects or hidden aspects of health and healing, and how we're able to discover these alternate perspectives. You know, he said to me, you got to talk to Caroline Proctor, because she practices Chinese medicine and acupuncture, and she's also an ordained Presbyterian minister. So these are two different disciplines, very different disciplines, that you usually don't see practiced by the same individual. And of course, I was very curious by this and struck by how one person can practice two art forms which come from different lineages, different cultural traditions, different regions of the world, and yet integrate the aspects of these and the principles that guide these different traditions to learn more about ourselves, about what health and healing is. What is individual health? What is community health? What is spiritual health? What does this mean? And she's studied this from two very different backgrounds, and she's integrated this in her practice. Not necessarily in every aspect of what she does, but it informs her, these two different schools. And we had a wonderful conversation where we explored how she's able to integrate this, how she came into this line of work, and what it means for her. It was cool because we bonded over the fact that we both went to Davidson College, and I'm kind of partial to that place, and she is too, and so we were able to kind of hit it off right from the get-go, and I really enjoyed talking to her. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Caroline Proctor. You don't really have much of an accent, kind of a southern accent, so I wasn't sure exactly where you were from.
It comes out more when I'm tired.
Right. Yeah.
My parents are Southern. My father's from North Carolina, long lineage in North Carolina.
Okay.
And my mother grew up in Georgia.
Yeah.
In
what part
Columbus.
of North Carolina?
My father was in Jacksonville and Greensboro, growing up mostly.
Yeah. Okay.
And my mother was in Columbus.
Columbus, Georgia.
Georgia.
Okay.
And she has lots of sayings that are more Southern.
Yeah.
Like, bring me that from over yonder. Something like that would be a thing my mother would likely say.
My grandparents said that frequently, and my parents tried to hold on to that one too in raising us. It's hard to keep that one going, though. You know?
Over yonder.
Yeah, over yonder. Yeah, so you grew up in Tallahassee.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. We were there. My father's work took him there. It was largely my world. We came up to this part of the country. I grew up Presbyterian, and Montreat was a big pilgrimage that my friends and I made every summer. We would come to Montreat for a week or 2 weeks. But other than that, Tallahassee was a lot of my world, and it was a university town. There's a fabulous music program. There was theater there. There was also football.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Tallahassee. there was, and a community, the government was there, it's the capital of Florida, so there was a lot of government work. So it was an interesting collection of people in those days really working hard, I think, to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
I think looking back, I was extraordinarily privileged to be surrounded by people who wanted me to feel safe and welcome. It wasn't a big city. It was on nobody's path to anywhere.
Yeah.
Tallahassee. So everyone who came there had a reason to come there, but just really good, strong, salt-of-the-earth people that were part of raising me. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. And you had brothers and sisters?
I have 2 younger brothers. I'm the oldest, only girl.
Interesting, yeah.
And we all live in Asheville, North Carolina now.
Okay. What about your parents?
My parents still live in Tallahassee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right.
They do. And my mom spends part of the summer nearby on Lake Summit.
Yeah.
In Flat Rock, North Carolina.
Well, that's where Brooke's from.
Oh, really?
Brooke was born and raised in Tuxedo. Yeah.
Oh, wow. We probably went to square dances together.
Maybe.
In Saluda or something.
Yeah.
How about that? So Tuxedo.
Right there at Lake Summit, yeah.
Well, we went there to fill the boat. With gasoline. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sure I saw her as a little girl.
Yeah, her grandfather owned one of the gas stations or service stations in town.
Was it Caps?
Gosh, I don't know the name of it.
Okay.
But I've met some folks from Tuxedo over the years. Freeman's Lunch, Jack Freeman, met him. But anyhow, it's nice to find these little connections here. And Lake Summit's a beautiful place, and Tuxedo is. So y'all had a connection with the mountains from
my mother's family.
Your mother's family, okay. Nice. So, comfortable childhood growing up in Tallahassee?
It's hot there.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid, it was playing tennis and swimming. There was a lot of swimming and tennis. And But it was. I had a really fortunate, lucky childhood.
Yeah.
In many ways.
And what was high school like?
Oh, wow. High school. I remember...
I always have to ask about high school because it's such a formative time.
It was for me. So I guess I was a bit of a geek. I was in the Latin club. I had this idea that my best friend was the head cheerleader.
Okay.
One of my best friends. And my best friend from middle school, we'll say, was the head cheerleader. So I had this idea that maybe I wanted to be the mascot, which was a lion, but I never tried for that. I had some really great friends in high school, but I remember being pretty tall and a little gangly in some ways, I guess, and awkward. I remember feeling awkward in high school.
Like everyone does, I think, in
maybe
their own way.
Maybe so.
Maybe not everyone. I think there's some people out there who just sail right through it when things come easy to them, but it's certainly awkward for me. So you found your niche.
I found my place. I did. I found my place. And I found people outside my family, too, that were great support to me and really important to me. And I think because I happened to grow up in a church community which had a very large group of young people, that it was really... I had a lot of friends that felt safe to me. That we had a lot of fun, and we could be goofy together, and we could trust each other, and I'm very fortunate for that, and still sometimes in touch with them. Yeah. There's a large choir. We had a choir director who I remember calling. She would call me and say, "We're going to have a new visitor, and I really want you, Caroline. You have this special gift of welcoming these new people, and I really want you to pay attention to them and help them feel included." And I was in my 30s before I figured out she had called every single person in that choir and said the same thing to them. But she really made me feel important and gave me a job that mattered, and built a choir of over 100 kids. So, there was plenty of fun and play and laughter and trips and true companionship, which I think not everyone in high school feels.
Yeah. Well, that's similar to my experience in high school as well, because I went to a school that had a lot of cliques, probably like most high schools, but I didn't really fit in anywhere in school proper, but I did find comfort in my church youth group and had some really close friends and some good relationships that sustained me and helped me get through high school. You must have done well in school, I'm guessing, being in a Latin club and identifying yourself as geek.
I might have gone there for extra help. Not sure. But my friends would go there, and the teacher was a lot of fun. She made it a lot of fun. So I did fine in school. There were things I loved in school. We had a literature class, and we had a teacher that was... So I graduated high school in 1984, and we read contemporary literature, and she would bring in the newspaper and discuss the book. So in 1984, we were reading George Orwell, 1984.
Oh, yeah.
And she would bring in the paper and talk about what was happening in Poland. Solidarność was going on at that time. And I remember having this sense that just because it was written a long time ago doesn't mean it doesn't matter today. There was just I had some formative teachers. I had a teacher that taught art history, and she was just so effusive about every period. We would get to the Gothic, and she would say, "This is my favorite time, and just look at this. And it's so amazing, and you can see the design." And she had said the same thing about every period up to that point. But we were just in love with every part of what she would teach because she was so in love with the material. And so I had this real sense that you can point to beauty and lead someone else there, which was really wonderful.
Yeah. Wow.
A pivotal piece of my high school years and middle school was my grandmother. My father's mother had Alzheimer's disease in a time before we had a name for that.
Yeah.
And so she lived with us for a time, and watching her decline and watching my father watch her decline, that would be a place where I think it was lonely for my family. Not many people were going through it at that time.
Right.
And I remember feeling so confused and angry. Like that was the one place where I felt like that what was happening was unjust somehow. Not so much to me, but to my grandmother and to my father, and just how it was hard as a family to have someone who couldn't be with you. And in those days, we didn't understand that it would be okay to go to her and join her in her childhood space, and to she would think I was her best friend from first grade. And I wish I had just played with her and learned what her first grade was like, instead of trying to help her see that she was my grandmother. And she was in Florida, and I wanted so much for her to join my reality that I wasn't really able to join her party.
Yeah, it's got to be hard to do for a kid. You know.
It was. It was challenging. It was challenging.
Yeah.
I remember a very loud rant at God about that, beating on the back of the pew and screaming how unfair it was. And I had this notion that difficult things were given to us so we would learn something. And I remember ranting that there was nothing more to learn. Whatever the lessons were, we had learned them by now. And that day, I went with my dad to visit her. She lived in a home. After she lived with us for a while, it became unmanageable and for us to care for her. And she moved to a home in Georgia, and we would drive up there about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And I walked in, and a nurse came up to me and said, "Are you Christabel's granddaughter?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I'm so glad to see you. Your grandmother plays the piano for the residents sometimes, and it calms them down so. It's such a light." And it was such a gift back to me from this sense of she can't talk, she can't be present, she doesn't know who we are, but she was a concert pianist and she could still sit down at the piano and play.
Yeah.
And so that it was a lesson to me that there were still gifts from her to others that I was not aware of.
Yeah.
And so that was a lovely place of healing from an unexpected place, I think.
Yeah, there's a documentary out about that now that people have mentioned to me that it's on my list of things to see about when we hear music, or it's folks with Alzheimer's disease, they give them an iPod with music on it and it helps them reconnect to something, either to the music. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but I'm imagining your experience here, that was a place where you could reconnect with your grandmother's talent and her humanity.
Her humanity is well said. I think that's right.
Yeah.
That she couldn't meet me in my reality, but she was still a human being who could connect with other people in a way that changed their day.
Yeah. So I just met you a couple days ago, and this is the first time we've sat down and talked, but I'm getting the sense that being a Latin major, or not a Latin major, but having an interest in Latin in high school, and just the way that you're sharing your experience with your grandmother, that you had an appreciation for a sense of space and time to think and reflect. It's kind of some of your personality that I'm getting a little sense of right now. Is that right?
I think that is right. I think I'm an introvert who's lived a largely extroverted life, but I really love the chance to savor words.
Yeah.
I do. I love words.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was part of my grief with my grandmother, that she lost them. But music was a place to connect. So,
did you write poetry? Do you write poetry?
I don't
Yeah.
write much poetry. I write more prose.
Uh-huh.
I did write in high school. I still have a book of poems that I wrote, which were, I'm sure there's a correct language for this, but I would say that they were a bit more of a rhyming ditty than poetry, but they were a great expression for me at the time of whatever my struggle was.
I think everything counts as poetry.
Well, I think I was going for a Dr. Seuss sort of sound, but I was not nearly so clever and incisive as he.
Well, we're our own worst critic, or
That's right.
At least our own criticism is an issue, but you were able to find some expression through it and have an outlet, a creative outlet. Yeah.
Right.
So we were talking on Wednesday, we both went to Davidson College.
That's right.
Which is kind of a unique place in the South, liberal arts school. And we just missed each other there by a bit, but you were sharing some of your experiences there. What was that like for you? Was being an introvert part of what drew you to Davidson?
Davidson won me over. I went there in my junior year of high school. My parents sent me there to experience what college would be like. And I think like you, my father had gone to Davidson, and we visited on a very gray, dreary December time, and I thought, I will never go to this school.
Right.
But I got talked into applying for the summer program, and I fell in love with the place. And I still have such great appreciation for the education that I received there. Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful place. It was, in some ways, for me, socially, an extension of high school. I felt a little unsure of myself, I think. I spent a lot of time with older people there. So I had what we would call at the time an adopted grandparent, and I crocheted with her and visited with her. And my grandmother had taught me to crochet, so that was a very nice link for me with my grandma.
Nice.
And I was exposed to so much life and wonder. It was pretty Eurocentric education when I was there. I'm really delighted to see how much more worldly the literature and the courses and the world has gotten much more accessible. I was using the card catalog when I was in college. There was no internet, and I'm old enough to remember when answering machines were the new thing.
Yeah, right.
So it was a different time in a lot of ways. But there was a real value of excellence. There's a value there of bringing your best to the table. And I came to really believe in that. And the other thing about that school for me was that there was a clear explication that what education is about is being able to go into the world and serve and make it better for people for whom the world is not so good. And I think that was really, I did not know that that wasn't all colleges, that it wasn't about me getting something, but it was about me being able to become something of use and of an agent of change to help people's lives improve. So I'm really grateful for that. I also took up running in college. I ran probably half marathons daily, which would suggest I was a little bit stressed. I think I found it. I'm sure I was a very anxious person in a lot of ways. But what I remember was the freedom to make connections and do things, have projects. I was introduced to Latin America in college, and that was very important to me. They did a trip to study U.S. policy and liberation theology. It was led by two professors. Theology. Liberation theology, which is Catholic. Liberation theology came from the Catholic Church. Okay. And the idea was that if you look at Scripture and you look at the world, that God is on the side of the most vulnerable. The phrase you learn is, God has a preferential option for the poor. And it developed a lot in Latin America. It was part of the revolutions in Latin America against the dictatorships, I think. And it was labeled as Marxist, and it was labeled as socialist, because there was this sense that it was not for the market economy. It felt that it was wrong for some Christians to be billionaires and other Christians to be starving. So that was sort of liberation theology, and it had a lot of different forms. And one of those forms was that God would want you to fight the oppressor. And there were other more nonviolent forms of liberation theology. But the current Pope, I think a lot of what underlines his positions right now about money and about justice and about all people being welcome is this thread of liberation theology. And it was very important to me in my theological education, was this idea that God wants life for everybody. God wants abundance for everybody. So that was a piece of my own.
Yeah. Is there something
education.
like social justice is that God is on the side of social justice to some degree?
Yes.
Okay.
Or the Martin Luther King kind of, the
Yeah.
arc of justice is long, but there's a sense that God's hand is in that God's always choosing the one that shouldn't be. God's using the second child. God's using the impoverished. God's using the imprisoned. God's using the people who are sick, lepers. That's where God's going. If you want to be with God, then go and be where God's active and where people are open enough to receive. They're not so busy protecting all the stuff that they have, but they're really kind of exposed. They're vulnerable to receive something really different.
Right. In the transformative experience of which is anxiety provoking, to use the psychiatric term anxiety, but there's an uncertainty at those thresholds that there can be a beauty in that.
After college, I worked for a couple of years doing outreach, and what I discovered was that what really I loved the most was listening to the questions that students brought from their encounters with people that were different than they had expected. So a very telling encounter for me was a student who had been with I think it was maybe tutoring, can't remember the specifics, but she'd been encountering a family, and she came to talk to me. We were just sharing kind of what was that like, what was your experience? And she said, they really love God, but they're really poor and a lot of bad things have happened. And it dawned on me that for her, she'd never really thought about that. There are people who are people of great faith who have really struggled.
Yeah.
And it's not because they lacked faith or weren't a good person, but that there was something in the system that had gone awry. So I guess that's what I mean about sort of college, there's this time when you encounter the world and you confront your belief systems, and you can be surprised by what they are. So I think for this student, it was a time of confusion, and all of a sudden, the way she thought the world was put together didn't line up exactly with what she was now experiencing.
I can still relate to that. That happens to me all the time.
Right?
Still,
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? It's
I'm having to reframe my views because the world doesn't seem to fit in with them.
Exactly right. It's very disappointing.
It is. And I just have to work with my anger all the time and settle myself. It's very humbling.
Want it to be a different way.
Yeah, right.
So I thought about going to social work school.
Yeah, okay.
And a very dear friend of mine was a social worker, and I watched her fill out lots of paperwork. And what I decided was that for me, I wanted to be part of this God project.
Yeah.
I wanted the church to be the place where I was doing that work.
Not the paperwork.
Not the paperwork. Right, exactly.
Well, God bless the social workers for filling out all that
exactly.
dreaded paperwork.
That's the truth.
Because they're doing some noble service themselves, but also you were gravitating towards the meditative and contemplative aspects of the peacemaking work, perhaps. I
think that I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And there was part of me that was fairly strident probably in those days.
Okay. Yeah.
I was raised well, so I tried to be polite about it, but I think I felt pretty strident. And looking back, to be honest, I think that I had this notion that Jesus had done a really good job of starting this whole project of fixing the world and its problems, and that I was just going to pick up where he left off and finish the work. I was pretty, not in a global sense of that, or not in an ultimate sense, but I think I kind of felt this drive of, if I just told the story right, everybody would understand and we would solve world poverty. There was this like lovely innocence.
Yeah.
That in my worst moments, I think I feel really embarrassed about that. But in my best moments, I just really am so happy that I had a time to feel that way.
Yeah, right. Because that optimism is great. I mean, that's going to fuel a lot of good work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's really true. I think we so need these voices of what's happening isn't right and it can be better.
Yeah.
And we can do better, and to see all possibility, I think, is one of the greatest, most important gifts of our youth. And I am beginning now to want to reclaim that for myself, that really anything is possible.
Yeah.
That anything is possible. It just depends on where we put our attention and what we want to do with our energy. So back then, I was pretty motivated in that direction to work with the church. And I think the unconscious part of me, that was a place where I'd felt accepted and safe and welcome and important in some way. So it felt like that the church was a place that would take me in.
Yeah.
And give me my fair chance. And so, which it has done, and I'm really grateful for that. The seminary I went to Duke,
right,
Divinity School, which is a Methodist program, and there were some incredibly influential people, teachers in that program. Notably, Dr. Willie Jennings made a very big difference in my thinking and understanding about racism and encountering that story in me.
Is this a man or a woman?
A man.
Okay.
Willie Jennings, Dr. Willie Jennings. He taught a course called Black Church Studies, and we had to read a lot of the narratives. We didn't have to read. We were assigned, and it was a great challenge and privilege to read things that I had never encountered before. They were journals from slave owners. They were journals from slaves. They were stories and hymns and songs, and he was just able to challenge me in a way that changed how I thought about many things. And the thing that he said, I remember after about 3 months of all this reading, feeling so clear about how this, it was like I couldn't even breathe reading more and more of this, the depth and breadth of the horror of that period, and of the ways in which people of pink skin like me had judged, made invisible, disappeared people of brown and black skin. And I said, well, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, Caroline, when you go into your white suburban middle-class church, which at the time I thought I would go to California and work with AIDS patients, so it felt a bit of a slap at that time when he said that. When you go to your white middle-class suburban church, which is all the churches I served were in fact just that. So he knew me better than I knew myself, perhaps. He said, I want you to take a child into your arms at the baptism font and say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You are no longer white. And I remember at that moment knowing exactly what racism was in the church. Because I thought, I don't know that I can do that.
Yeah.
But that is, in fact, the truth. I do believe that's the truth. And someone in the class...
What's the truth?
That children who are part of the family of faith are not white or black. That's not an identifier of meaning anymore.
Mm-hmm. So like the baptism is an absolution of the shame of the white inheritance and the sins.
It's more that... So the rest of the story is that somebody said, well, are you going to say that for a black child too?
Right.
And they said, we don't need to. We know we're more than black.
Wow.
So it was really about that he really was able to find a way for me to feel how I believe there's meaning that my skin is pale and pink. It's very relevant and very meaningful in the world in which we live, and that is the problem. So that was a formative moment for me, I think. It really changed how I operated.
Yeah, I've never heard
thinking.
It put quite like that before.
There was drama for me in him saying that, I think. And I have told that story in every white suburban middle-class church I served. So I've told the story.
How is it received?
It's been received with great... So the positive way to say it is there's just some real awe and wonder in that truth that he said.
Yeah.
That we miss when we have never heard it. So maybe I think that's the way in which it's been received, is the surprise. It's just very unexpected.
Yeah.
But it is something to sit with, I think. It was, for me, very healing and transformative. Mm-hmm. In a place I didn't know was an open wound somehow. So that was important. Stanley Hauerwas was a very colorful figure there. Many people are aware of him. Very focused on peace and narrative theology, that story is important. And I think because I spent some time in Mexico, that is a very storied people. I think Latin America is very storied, and I really love story. So this linking together is such a privilege to visit my story. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Hopefully this is part of the tradition somehow. Mm-hmm. So you're at Duke Divinity School, and you're discovering more about theology, more about yourself, and you're finding a path for your work. Where did that lead you from there? To the white suburban church?
To the white suburban church?
Yeah.
Well, I started ordained ministry in a hospital. And I did 2 years of clinical training at Carolina's Medical Center, where, again, I had brilliant mentors. I just had beautiful, brilliant women and mentors, and I loved that in a waiting room, you just get a slice of America. You get, it's such a mishmash. I spent 6 months working in the trauma center, and I can remember a family from India, a biker gang, and a woman that wore a fur coat and pearls every day. We're all in the waiting room together. And you could watch how one family entering a waiting room could turn a very anxious and unsettled space into a family and a hopeful, optimistic, happy space. And it's such a story about who we encounter or what we bring into any given space matters for everybody in that space.
Yeah.
That we are agents of healing for one another, whether we're in the line at the grocery store, whether we're in a hospital waiting room. People who spent, weeks and months in hospital rooms. I learned so much about life and about joy and relief and wandering the desert. And I can remember thinking,
wandering the desert of the hospital.
At the hospital.
Yeah.
There's some real, you don't really know when the journey's going to end. You don't know how it's going to end. You just know that, well, tomorrow we're going to wake up. So we woke up in a tent again today, and we hope we encounter some water to parch the thirst that comes with not knowing and fear and anxiety. And not that that's all that's in a hospital. There's all kinds of stories happening in a hospital. Yeah. Babies are getting born and people are getting well. But often when the chaplain got called, those were people were in some desert days.
Yeah. And
so that was my first bit in the hospital. I spent some time working in pediatrics, and I had recently studied Spanish, so I was able to also visit with folks from Spanish-speaking countries and be able to talk with them, and that was a great gift to me, was to be able to use this language, use these words that we don't have in English exactly.
Yeah.
So that was really a wonderful thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were a chaplain for a couple years.
A couple years. I was a hospital chaplain, and then I did congregational work. I was at Amity Presbyterian Church for a few years, and they really were so kind and gracious to me. I was so green, and I was so ready to help them. And of course, they were the ones who made me.
Yeah, right.
So I'm very grateful to that. And then Selwyn Avenue Presbyterian Church was a church that I think really, they gave me my voice. They gave me my voice. They listened me into myself in some way. Their children were so smart, and they were generous. They were generous with me. But I guess in a way, they understood me. They loved words also.
Yeah. Where was this? Is this in Charlotte?
Charlotte.
Yeah.
Both of these churches were in Charlotte. And I was there for a few years, and then I went to the University Presbyterian Church in Chapel Hill to be the campus minister.
Okay.
And to do mission. And so that was great fun. And I think it was 18 years after I had done my trip to Guatemala on this tour to study U.S. policy, I took a group of students to Guatemala. So there was a lovely little kind of life bending back on itself, or this the wrinkle in time, where life just sort of, you tag back into that. So that was lovely. And
when were you at University Presbyterian?
I moved there in 2001. So I was there about a month before September 11th. I remember that date particularly on campus. And I was there until 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
My brother and his wife got married there in 2006.
Oh.
Yeah.
Who were they?
Andrew Johnson and Leslie Johnson. Leslie Weaver, now Johnson.
Leslie Weaver. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I probably knew them.
Yeah, they were coming through. Yeah. And they're actually driving up here today.
With the baby, with the boys.
Yeah, right.
That's great.
So I was just making those, because there's all kinds of connections in our stories, having gone to Davidson, and I'm from Charlotte, and hearing the connections in these threads is very interesting to me personally. And listening to the way you describe these experiences from your background as a minister, and you talk about holding space, which is a term that's used in mental health work as well. I'm not sure we're as adept at it as the clergy, but I recognize it as an important part of healing is to hold space and the inclusivity of people and their experience, and to allow some room for people to just be.
Do you find in your work that if you can sit with them long enough, they find their own way to more peace sometimes?
Yes.
It's my experience.
Yeah. And that's the lesson that I'm learning, is how to do that.
Right.
It's funny because, I don't know if it's funny, but it's funny looking back at how simple it would have been to have practiced that all along. But our training in Western medicine is more of taking action and attempting to shape the narrative rather than allowing people just to experience themselves, which is where the healing, the source of healing often comes from.
That's what acupuncture is. Chinese medicine has given me. Is that gift, which is
so
the next leg on the journey.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is I've been kind of waiting here and there to listen for the spot at which you made that connection. When did that happen for you?
Well, I left the campus ministry position in 2007, and for 2 years I worked as I worked as director of a nonprofit that was supporting women getting released from prison, and I supervised chaplaincy at a minimum security prison in Raleigh for a couple of years.
Okay.
And that was the time when I thought, I need to regroup a bit, because the thing that was nourishing to me in ministry was the connection with the people, but I was increasingly removed from the one-on-one that I found early on in the hospital and the church, that I was interacting now with sort of the judicial system in North Carolina, and that seemed like a very big entity to maneuver around.
Yes. Yeah.
And I also think I got a little burned out. I think I just felt weary. And the suffering that is going on for incarcerated women and men is so complex and overwhelming. And I don't think we're doing a good job of bringing hope and light. And I don't think that we are doing what we could to see potential and all possibility in the lives that we are locking away. We're removing from our sight. So eventually, I would like to find a way to hold more space for all possibility for people coming out of prison. But I started doing a lot of meditation of my own, a lot of journaling, a lot of looking for words. And in that process, I had a memory of a friend studying acupuncture. So I journaled a lot about Marilyn, who she was to me, what she meant to me, what it was, the visit that I had when I saw her studying acupuncture. And I journaled for about 4 months, after which time I admitted to myself that possibly I should look into acupuncture school. And my father's a Western medical doctor. He's a pathologist. So I had never had acupuncture. I didn't know anything about acupuncture, but I started Googling schools, and there was a school in Asheville, North Carolina. So I applied to the school. And I remember before my interview, I decided that I better get a treatment in case, so I would know what it felt like before I came to visit. So I also think that I was largely drawn to the body. I think that the other piece for me is I had gotten so far away from my body, which had run these half marathons every day in college, that now I was so in my head. And so there was such a disconnect. And I think that Presbyterians, one of the great contributions that we bring is this value of education and healthcare, and we're not so good at thinking about our bodies. And so for me, I came to Taoist traditions here in Asheville, and in middle age, it's really challenging to memorize new things and to make the brain work in different pathways, to learn a whole different way of looking at the world, this sort of Taoist understanding of life and
had you had an interest in the Asian perspective or the Eastern perspective at all before this meditative process?
No.
Okay.
It was out of the blue.
It emerged.
Luckily, we would say woo woo.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But yes, I think you're right. I think it did. I think it really truly emerged. Mm-hmm. And I remember feeling like I just want one body, 1 hour, one fix. After working with the prison system, which just seemed like countless hours, hundreds of bodies, and no hope of a fix.
Yeah.
So it turns out that you don't really have 1 hour, one fix.
Yeah.
But it was a nice little storyline to get me through the door.
Yeah.
And we went to Arizona for 6 months. I went to massage therapy school out there.
Oh, okay.
My husband and I, and we just had a blast living in the desert. Every weekend we were tourists. So we had 26 weekends in 6 months. So we planned some adventure every weekend, and I would go to school. And then I came here to acupuncture school and Chinese medicine school. So right, it emerged. And it came out of this place of kind of chaos and disorientation that I felt in the prison, but it really did. I had learned from the liberation theology we were talking earlier, this notion of accompaniment, of walking with people on their journey. And that was really key for me. And working in the hospital, I came to understand that my job wasn't so much to bring God to the room, but to witness the healing in the room. And in Chinese medicine, in Taoist Chinese medicine, it's even a deeper step, which is that the body is doing its healing. The body is doing its work. The body is infinitely wise. And so suddenly, all the things that are going a little haywire with our bodies don't have to be the problem. They can be the teacher. They can help us learn where to pay attention.
Yeah. I had Dr. Saraswathi, Robin Saraswathi Marcus on here, and one of her quotes that just came to mind was that we don't have to live in opposition to our symptoms. And that goes along with what you're saying there,
That's
that it's
beautiful.
the teacher. Yeah.
That's beautiful. It can be the teacher.
Yeah.
Instead of a very recalcitrant child that we want to punish.
Yes, right. That we want to wrench into our version of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, what do you think were some of the links between your experience as a minister and your experience also as an acupuncturist?
That's just such a great question. I think that is my question in some ways still.
Yeah.
What I'm noticing is that Chinese medicine has helped me to hear the stories in a deeper way, maybe, or a more profound way. It's a narrative also that when I can offer it, often is healing. People will come to me with symptoms that don't seem to line up. They don't make sense. Or, for example, I recently saw someone who is going through a lot of pain and relationship ending, and I asked, where do you feel this in your body? And he took the palm of his hand and placed it between over his heart, which in Chinese medicine there is this point that is the kind of ignition of the heart itself. And he placed that, or the protector of the heart, which he placed over the heart. And so I talked about that a little bit, that we have these kind of systems. And I think it was just permission for him to say, it's okay for me to feel this here. It is the work. It is where this pain is here and it will not always be here. And my body knows what to do with this pain that's here. So there's a way to talk about the body and how it's doing its job well. A woman came in and she was saying, I said, well, how do you feel about your body in general? She says, well, I have all this kind of, cellulose, and it just makes me crazy. And so I talked about, well, your body's job is to protect the organs. So if there's more than the body can handle, it's going to locate it away from the organs. So your body's really doing its job. And she said, I love my cellulite. It's evidence of your body working well. So those are a few examples of the narrative. If you understand that the body is doing its job, and it gets overwhelmed sometimes. It's not able to do what you want it to do. And sometimes maybe that's news that it's not time to do those things that the body can't do.
Yeah.
So it also has taught me a lot about rest and action. Coming out of this background of wanting to take action and do all these changes and be this agent of change and fix the problems, and which I would still really love to do. I mean, I would love to just finish the work that Jesus started so everyone would have all that they needed and it would all work out great.
Yeah.
But Chinese medicine has given me a new understanding of rest. It's not laziness. It's not exhaustion. It's just sitting still and listening. And watching people come to their own place of connection to themselves, to something that nourishes them, whatever that is, to some peace. I mean, I think it's really miraculous that a really good, full-out temper tantrum can bring us to a state of grace. And quiet.
Right.
And I think that's really a miracle.
Yeah. The school you went to is Taoist traditions. And how do you see the Taoist tradition that guides Chinese medicine fitting in with the Presbyterian tradition? What kinds of similarities of experience are there?
So, and I should just mention that not all Chinese medicine is Taoist, but the classical medicine. So Jeffrey Yuen is a Taoist priest, and this is a school that offers his teachings.
Okay.
And that, I think I just got really lucky that I found a program that had this very strong, ancient lineage. And coming out of a different religion that also has a lineage. they line up for me in their value of creation as given by what is holy and good. And I think that it's deepened my appreciation in the Christian tradition as I learned it. I think it was truncated largely so that creation became this thing we were supposed to be good stewards of. In Chinese medicine, I've come to understand that creation holds the plants and the animals and the food and the nourishment that is our healing. They are our medicines,
right,
that we use for healing. So, for example, there's an acupuncturist in town who's left now named Mark Fortney, one of my teachers. And I got a horrible case of poison ivy. And it was up in my eye, it covered my whole face, my arm, my leg. It was very severe. And before I went to Chinese medicine school, I would have gone and gotten medication. But I kept thinking, I can tolerate it. So I'm going to see if I can just tolerate it and not take something that'll suppress it. And he pointed out that in my particular case, the imbalance in my system was exactly the thing that poison ivy causes you to clear, which was, in Chinese medicine words, dampness and heat. So if you look at poison ivy blisters, they're kind of gooey and red and hot. And he was pointing out, this grows in the places where it's damp and hot. So here's this medicine that we often think of as this evil plant that we want to kill and destroy, but it doesn't grow in the Arizona desert. It grows where it's needed to grow to solve the ailments of this region. The weather system that can cause us to be sick also grows the plants that help us to be well. So that for me was really quite a different way of understanding creation. And I think it's just made it so much more of a beautiful story in a way. So it's very connected in that way. There's stories of, in the Bible, there are these stories of healing where they put they talk about putting their lips on the lips of another, or their eyes on the eyes, nose on the nose. And there are ancient prescriptions of trauma where you would use powders or things to put mouth on mouth and nose on nose. And I sometimes wonder if there aren't some ancient healing prescriptions somehow kind of written throughout the text that we don't know how to understand anymore. But they came about at the similar time. So it's interesting for me to look at sort of the Christian tradition, which had Greece and Rome making its choices, and they had this kind of separation between the body and the spirit. So the spirit was good and the body was kind of profane, mundane, not holy. And in China, what was happening is that this whole understanding of what was holy was in the body. So their medicine is not so much about compartmentalizing the body, but it's to see the whole thing all together. And I just wonder how much of that is because of the kind of philosophical traditions and how they were different along those ways. And I'm sorry that my college wasn't teaching that when I was there. So I would love to have learned more about it then. But I'm fascinated by it. So those are some of the connections, I guess, if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you are. I have a very parallel experience of how the system of medicine that I was trained in could stand to learn for an allowance and a listening to the body and listening to our mind and our thoughts, how it relates to the body, and tolerating it. We could get a lot done with healing with that. So yeah, we have a lot to learn from the Eastern tradition. Yeah, and it's funny because you were talking about damp and heat, and my acupuncturist who I saw this week was just counseling me on working with my dampness, which has been going on for some time. Yeah.
Befriend the damp.
Yeah, right. Do you encounter any experiences where there's a conflict between the two traditions that you aren't able to resolve, or do you get any difficulties from either side, the Christian side or the Chinese medicine side?
Taoism holds space for all religions, so there's no pushback there. The thing that is different in the Christian tradition that doesn't have a parallel conversation going is this idea of Jesus.
Right.
This sort of God-man. And in a way, I think that when I try to understand my clients and the holiness, the goodness, the divine spark, whatever the language is that people want to use, but the sense of what life comes from within clients, I think that's what they were trying to say Jesus was, this very specific connection between what previously had been considered transcendent, this God that kind of broke in from the heavens with this powerful presentation of I am here, becomes this God that emerges, this wisdom, because there's this connection, this man who walked on the earth, who had the power to heal, who had the power to bring to life what was dead, and who, in fact, suffered death and was brought back by this God that breaks through creation. But we have this ongoing conversation, I think, in the Christian world about, well, is God other and somewhere else, or is God right here, right now? That's something else that Dr. Willie Jennings taught me. He said, in my church, we know God is right here. We don't need to call God into being. We don't need to walk the light in. God is here, right now. Not somewhere else. Right now. And was it Annie Dillard that talked about we should wear seatbelts and crash helmets and when we come to church because the Spirit's going to come and upset everything. And so for me, because narrative is important, I feel able to hold both of these narratives and to really learn one from the other. They deepen it. They deepen one another for me over and over again. Each of the stories deepens my understanding of my place in this world. And I never watched nature to understand my body before Chinese medicine school.
Yeah.
But I'm just looking at the rain today, this gentle, steady rain.
Yeah.
And it just feels like a relief.
Yeah. It does.
It just feels like a relief.
Yeah.
And I think, there's this need for water.
Yeah.
We're kind of beginning this season of fall, which can get so dry. And then we're kind of, next we sail along into this winter, this kind of deep, dark cave.
Yeah.
And in the quiet. And I'm just grateful for it. But before I would have just thought, oh gosh, I have to get a raincoat and I have to, it would have been a hassle. And now it can just be this.
Yeah. Well, as I'm just sitting here listening to this and having this conversation with you, it feels like you've cultivated this ability to listen, to open to experience, to observe, and to have a curiosity about the experience and to learn from it. And I think that our culture could really benefit from that approach. We're in the midst of a series on communication technology, a group discussion series on it in my practice, and just thinking about and feeling the experience of this world we live in that is chaotic and feels like it's ever accelerating. It's difficult to find that kind of experience within ourselves. It's not going to happen by accident. We have to cultivate it for ourselves. Is there a practice that you use to cultivate this state?
Well, I think that you're presuming a lot more that I have it going on than I feel that I have it going on. It's definitely what I strive for. I mean, again, it's sort of this idea of I can see that it's possible that one could listen, that one could. And some days I feel like it. The truth is, for me, it's a gift. It comes. Some days it does not come. Some days I wake up and everything goes wrong and I'm just on the verge of tears all day. And I think, really, it might have been better if I stayed in bed like I wanted to in the first place. Because I have to go back and redo everything again the next day or, whatever it is. So those days happen to me a lot. There are days when, I think my dog is sick and I'm not as zen as I would like to be when I call the vet back to find out information or things like that. So I guess that I love to knit. I love to quilt. And so for me, there are these creative outlets. And in both of those just particular crafts that I like to do, but in both of them, the way that I hold the knitting or the way that I sit at the quilting table, the motion I'm doing the whole time is my hands are about at my heart level, and they're moving out and moving in, moving out and moving in. And I think that's proven to be pretty healing for me. It's just I'm not really thinking about it. I journal some, but I think that the times when I discover that I'm listening, or I discover that I'm sitting, are times that are sort of given to me somehow. And a lot of the time I just forget to notice. I forget to think, oh, I could just sit and look out the window instead of turning on the TV. Or, oh, I could just spend some time peeling this apple and slicing this apple and arranging it on a plate that's satisfying to my eye instead of driving to Green Life. And I could just nourish myself with this apple. But mostly I'm too busy in the car driving to Green Life.
Well, I mean, we all get caught up with it, but I like hearing the practice, the knitting and quilting practice. It reminds me of the yoga practice that's been introduced to me over the past few years. And Brooke has been teaching yoga for a while now, and she's pointed out to me that yoga in the West, as we practice it, the postures, the asana postures, is just one of the 8 limbs of the full spiritual tradition of yoga. And the purpose of these postures is just to get the wiggles out of the body so that our mind can quiet. And, just the act of knitting, is a way of kind of quieting the mind as you're knitting, not thinking about all your schedules and routines and dwelling on the past. You're just kind of going about your task and the physical aspect of it. And then that cultivates some quietude of mind, some space, so that we're able to receive. And then also hearing what you describe about how it's a gift, that reminds me of the Christian notion of grace. And having gratitude for that. And it's really lovely to hear both sides of it there.
When I was a kid, I remember my mother telling me, I played the piano like my grandma. And she said, I don't know what that piano has in it, but you'll go in there, mad as a hornet, bang away at that thing, and come out playing lullabies. So
the piano was playing you.
That's right. I think the piano was playing me. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's funny. My mom said ill as a hornet as well. I recognize that one. Yeah.
One of my teachers, maybe several of them, I'm starting to feel like I should name one out because I'm not sure if I heard it from several, but it's this notion that this conversation about qi, which we use in Chinese medicine and a lot of the Asian practices, which for me has come to be a lot of this kind of this life force. It is the thing that happens when yin, the substance, and yang, the spirit, connect. That's when qi happens. And when they separate, qi is gone, I think.
Okay.
Or qi is transformed is maybe more true for the Taoist perspective. Okay. But for me, what it's meant is that everything is in relationship all the time. And that the rain is in relationship with the sun, is in relationship with the water and the trees and the leaves but that everything's always in relationship. Even so when we have a disconnection with a partner or a friend or a lover or a child, there's this disconnection, but that's still a relationship. That there's still pieces are kind of being held on. So in the medical practice, which for me is very spiritual, a lot of my spiritual learning is coming from this medical practice I'm learning and beginning. There is this sense of just trying to understand what the quality of the relationships are in the body, in the spirit, in the thinking, in the thought. And I think that's also been important in my own Christian practice, is what are these relationships and how do I understand all things to be in relationship with one another. So that was one thing I wanted to add, was just this notion of in healing, I think, it is about reclaiming relationship to the self, to the story, so that what has happened in your life somehow begins to be connected with what will happen in your life. You're standing between these two. If you orient too much to the past, that can cause some stuckness.
Yeah.
And if you jump way too far ahead in the future, that creates anxiety.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of stand in this one place and know it's all in relationship, and even the things that are painful and insurmountable and overwhelming, that's just a relationship. And you can begin to maneuver that relationship a little bit. Then for me, that's what I witness as healing. So
yeah, wow, I really like the way you put that, and that's so relevant to mental health work, and it sounds like what I try to speak of with my clients, or what I often speak of with my clients, is that across all spiritual traditions, even for people who identify themselves as atheists, we can still think of life as what's led to this point is there. It has a purpose. It's just, even if it's just history,
right.
And then to be able to learn from that purpose, to kind of guide ourselves in the future, allows us to know that we can participate in this process, and that does fit in well with probably all spiritual traditions. And that helps us to link the spiritual aspect of our lives and our bodies, and our minds, which is the world of psychiatry.
Which in Chinese medicine, there's no separation.
Right.
That for me was the hardest thing.
Yeah, talk about that.
Was to really, we just I mean, it's sort of like all the water I've ever drunk in my life said, well, the mind is separate and should be controlled. Emotions should be controlled, and the mind should be restrained. I mean, I did have a lot of that kind of, Southern Protestant polite upbringing, which I treasure and cherish, but has had a few things to overcome.
Yeah, right.
And so what it meant for me was when somebody says, they don't act right. They don't know how to act or something like that. Yeah. That's a phrase that my husband has. They don't know how to act right or something like that. So, but it's not willful necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just that the body itself is sending signals that create this sort of response. Again, everything being in relationship. That the input doesn't necessarily determine the output. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it just goes a little haywire. It really forced me to have a much greater sense of compassion for people who were feeling confused. And for myself when I'm confused, when I'm really muzzle-headed and when I'm frustrated and taking it out on somebody that has no relationship correctly to what I'm frustrated about. It just helped me say, there's just something really out of whack. And that's usually a signal of I need to go to my corner and look out the window or knit a sweater or something. But for me, I think that the mind isn't separate. It isn't other.
Right.
And I think in our culture, we really treat it like it's other.
Yeah.
And we do ourselves, especially, and one another, a real disservice with that, I think.
And I like what you put there about the mind is not something to be controlled and kind of beaten into submission, perhaps. Which I think sometimes can get misconstrued for what meditation is. And I think I share the sentiments of having grown up in the Presbyterian church with the Calvinist striving tradition. And again, I'm grateful for this for many reasons, but one of the things that I've been slower to learn and develop is a softening of that striving notion in trying to control the mind, even through meditative type arts. I like the way you described it in that the mind is not separate, and if we're able to listen to the mind in relationship to the body and understand that it is all relationship, and then to be able to sit with that, and then we can be at peace with that. I don't know if that came out right, but
yeah, that's beautifully said. I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So I told you I spent some time when I was doing the chaplaincy gig. I spent some time at a mental hospital in Charlotte.
Yeah, right.
And you're bringing to mind a woman that I met who was saying she was having a lot of visions. She was seeing things that most people don't see. Mm-hmm. And when I came in, she said, "They think it's not there, but it's there." I said, "What? Tell me, what do you see? What's there?" And she said, "They're just like right there. There's just little lights everywhere." And it was dust. She'd kind of like plumped her pillow on the bed, and dust had come up. And the light was shining on such a way that you could see the little dust particles. And for her, they were these little lights. And I just remember thinking, I've just never thought that dust was beautiful. But in this way, she was able to see something, like give me this gift of things that I'm not always paying attention to. She was just, I think, more alert, more aware even. and seeing the things that I couldn't see, which is not to say she didn't also have a movie going in her head that the rest of us, or have access to some dimension that the rest of us aren't able to encounter. But that was a real lesson to me. I mean, I really remember thinking, I need to learn from this woman how to see.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this podcast I listened to yesterday with John O'Donohue. I'll send it to you.
Oh, good.
And it was fascinating. It was the On Being podcast with John O'Donohue.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And Krista Tippett just does such a great job in her interviews there. She has such wonderful guests. And he was talking about our need for beauty. It's not a luxury for us. We have a need for it. Like an inner hunger for beauty as part of our essence. And not beauty in terms of glamour, but the beauty in terms of wonder. And so that's fresh in my mind. And as you're describing this person's experience of, seeing the light in the dust, that, sometimes hallucinations perhaps, and these type of alternate experiences maybe just are ways of fulfilling that need for finding the beauty in life.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've been able to speak of the water element and to remind me of what a beautiful day we have today with this nice steady rain and how the earth needs it, and it's nice to be a part of that. Thank you so much for sharing this.
I really treasure this opportunity.
Yeah, well, let's talk about how folks can find you here in Nashville. You have an acupuncture practice.
I do.
Yeah.
My husband and I have a practice together.
Okay.
He does spiritual direction and dream work with folks. And so our business is called Elemental Health, LLC. Okay. And the website is Elemental Health NC, standing for North Carolina. So elementalhealthnc.com. And I'm also a transitional pastor at New Hope Presbyterian Church on Sweeten Creek Road until they hire a permanent pastor. So in coming months, I'll be there, and you're welcome to join us. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
It's a lovely, welcoming congregation, and they're teaching me a lot right now.
Wonderful.
Learning a lot with them.
Yeah.
So those are the two ways.
So you're active in both fields right now.
Doing both things, yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for all of these wonderful stories.
It's a gift what you're doing with these podcasts. So
great.
It's lovely.
Well, thank you. Well, how do you feel?
I feel great.
All right, that's it. That was my conversation with Caroline Proctor. Really enjoyed talking with her. So thanks to her for what she shared, and thanks to you for tuning in to Anecdotal Evidence. Again, our home on the web's at danieljohnsonmd.com/podcast. We're on iTunes and YouTube, so check us out there, subscribe to us. Send us an email, anecdotalevidence@danieljohnsonmd.com. Any feedback is appreciated. We'd love to hear from you, including if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast. Got some really exciting guests coming up. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. This is Daniel Johnson, MD. Take care.